All right, so now let's just start our talk with Shefik. So Shefik, do you think you could just give yourself a quick introduction so everyone just kind of knows some information about you? I think I already did a short introduction before.
Hi, so my name is Shefik,
Oh,
and
Shefik, my bad.
thanks for inviting me today. I appreciate it. So, I've been doing technology and media for the past, 25 years now or so, and I'm, currently working at NBC Sports as a technical lead, working on projects, high-profile projects such as the Winter Olympics, Summer Olympics, and upcoming, World Cup. It's just building technical solutions that are mission critical to the business, and just finding creative ways to be innovative in that space.
Sure. And can you just also tell us a bit more about your radio show, which you also host?
Yeah, so my radio show was actually started in July 4th, 2016. So this is actually the 5th year anniversary of the show. It's called Shefik Presents Invocation, and it's a terrestrial radio show. It's 1 hour every week, and I'm on 23 stations around the country, AM, FM stations all around the country, and it's really based on the human condition. So each guest speaks on something meaningful in their lives, and then based on that content, I match it with a song. And then once you get to the whole experience, the full hour, you have an experience where you get different perspectives about the human condition, what that topic means to that person. It could be a mantra, it could be something meaningful as far as something inspired them, all kinds of things. And I have all kinds of guests on the show, celebrities, people from all ages, occupations, and various reasons.
Yeah, yeah, that sounds really interesting. So, what's your experience with hackathons specifically? I'm pretty sure you have had some previous experience.
Yeah, so actually, I started hackathons more frequently when COVID hit. Um, Throughout 2020, there was a series of hackathons at MIT. I joined the second one that they did, and this was involving COVID solutions, and they wanted to find ways that they could help serve the people from various countries. So I joined the second one, and their focus area was Africa. And actually, I'm from Africa myself. I was born here in the United States, but my family's from Sierra Leone, West Africa. So it fit well into things that aligned with my culture and as far as helping people. So as it turned out, I ended up winning that particular hackathon. Right, there were 7 of us that came together for that particular weekend. It was a Friday to Sunday weekend. We never knew each other for that weekend. And 7 of us, all came together and didn't know what we were going to do, and we came together and we represented 7 different countries. So me being here in the United States, we had someone from Canada, we had someone from India, South Africa, Kenya, and so on. So when we came together, it was quite an amazing experience because first of all, we have a diversity of people coming together from various parts of the world that never knew each other, and then we're coming together for a common cause. So again, we tried to find solutions that were relevant for Africa regarding COVID, and by us, winning that hackathon, we ended up getting support from Amazon. So Amazon became a partner for the next 2 years for us, where they gave us funding and credits and things like that. And MIT itself has been a great partner, throughout this process also. Yeah.
That's really cool. So like I think a problem some people at this hackathon might also have is so 7's a really big number, especially for a team, especially among like different time zones. So how'd you kind of manage having such a large team across different time zones, and how'd you kind of like make it work?
Well, first of all, don't go to sleep, right? So it all depends, right? When you have different people come together for various reasons, when there's hackathon in particular, everyone has different skill sets and things that they bring to the table. Not everyone needs to be a coder with their hands on coding, right? That's sort of a misconception too, right? When people come together, they could be business people, they could be graphical people, they could be all sorts of people, project leaders, all these kinds of people take different roles to bring together projects. And it's not only in the hackathon, that's what happens in real life. If you work in a corporate atmosphere, everyone brings something different to the table and their contributions make a difference, whatever the strengths and weaknesses are as a whole. And as far as the time zones, that's something everyone has to map out, as a team to figure out what that means. Because again, when you deal with people where you have different time zones and different sort of skill sets, everyone could sort of work on things at different times and then find a way that the times overlap, where everyone have their team meetings and everything. When you're dealing with a hackathon, of course, everything's like crunch time. You have that quick, 48-hour turnaround time. So again, that goes back to saying you get very little sleep, during a hackathon, right? But the rewards are great, right? If you end up winning, you feel some sort of, pride in the work and something you delivered. You might get some notoriety from the judges and feedback that could bring you forward, going forward, even if you don't win, right?
Yeah, that definitely makes sense, because I feel like a big part of hackathons are the judges and guest speakers, because they like provide the experience which like maybe the organizers might not be able to provide.
Right.
Yeah. Also, so do you still like organize hackathons, or like go to them, or like currently what do you mean?
Yeah, I have. So what ended up happening, again, when I ended up winning that particular one, and that was around, April 2020, I got invited back subsequent times, actually multiple times, as a mentor, to the hackathons. So I've done maybe about 5 or so with MIT, not only the COVID related ones, but also things that are related to healthcare space in particular. So I got invited back maybe once a month or once every other month or so. And MIT has a lot of different divisions in their school, not just about healthcare again. The one I was in was particular for healthcare, but I got invited to other ones. Another one in particular I got invited to was for China. They had their student union where they dealt with people from China who were actually in China at the time. And then they had their students here in the US doing various visas and various student transfers. So they have their annual conference where they come together and find solutions that are relevant to China. This particular hackathon was geared towards how they could fix things or find solutions for their culture, such as agricultural sort of things. But the people I actually mentored for there was trying to find solutions to help save sort of the rice, farming, for rice. Because I think they said like rice is one of the largest, exports, in China. So they're trying to find ways that they could creatively not only monitor the rice, production from a technical advantage, whether you're building apps, you're building, weather solutions, things like that. But it was kind of interesting because we have a group of people here that were trying to find something to better their own people, in those countries. And you're putting aside politics, you're putting aside, cultural differences, everything like that, because when it comes down to it, there's people from all over the world have common solutions, right? They all have the common solutions of trying to find ways to solve hunger, not only in their regional community, but find ways to creatively, solve it in other parts of the world too.
Yeah, and I feel like common goals often lead to like common solutions. So
Right.
there's also like something like solving agriculture, like that's a very huge it's a very huge thing, especially like for an online hackathon. So like what was the solution which ended up being made? And also like I think that like goes to show how like even these huge things can be solved by relatively small or like small hackathon.
Yeah. So the thing to kind of keep in mind is that when you have a hackathon, especially something that's only a couple days long, you're not there to find the solution within the weekend, because that's not technically realistic. You're not going to build that prototype. You're not going to necessarily build something that's meaningful within that weekend. However, you are going to build something that's meaningful in terms of an idea, right? And then the people that come together for the hackathon, they could go forward to build the idea for real. They may get sponsors, they may get funding. All sorts of scenarios could happen. But the proof of concept is something that's comes viable from the hackathon, when you have different people from different parts of the world come together and they find common solutions and ideas. Because you may be sitting here with an idea, someone else in other part of the world may have a similar idea, and you come together and you find ways to creatively, find that solution. So the key with the hackathons is that it's not about finding business feasibility, right? When I say business feasibility, it's not about saying, is it profitable? That's not what the case is, right? You're not sitting here trying to figure out how much it's going to cost to build it. It doesn't matter. It's about building the idea first. Especially when you're dealing with technology and finding solutions like that, ideas could just come and they incubate. They may take decades to actually come to fruition. but that's how a society as a whole is able to move forward. And I could use COVID as an example, where a lot of people had a misconception as if the vaccine for COVID miraculously came, in a matter of months. That's not necessarily the case. It took years and years where the technicians, scientists incubated their ideas for that. It just so happened that now they actually implemented it during COVID time. But there was other, pandemics that happened, Ebola, all these kind of things that laid the foundation of knowledge. And that goes back to what these hackathons serve. You lay that foundation of knowledge and you apply that, for the future. Sometimes it may come quicker than others times to execute it, but it's really about what's possible, and then business feasibility and profitability and all that comes afterwards, right?
I think that really goes to show, because like obviously you're not making the product in 2 days, and I think even for this event we're fine with prototypes and all that. So like, how do you think you kind of take like the short term, like take the team you built in the hackathon, take the idea and kind of extend it past that? And like if you had any examples of you like doing that, that'd also be great.
Yeah, so first of all, it depends on where the hackathon is going to be at, right? There's also a misconception too that sometimes, especially when people are participating in hackathons for the very first time, they're not really sure about what a hackathon really is, right? So sometimes people come to join these things and thinking that, oh, we're going to join it and now we're going to be rich. Because sometimes in the media, you have this misconception, like you build something, you're able to sell it to another big company, you make the $1 billion sales, all the kind of stuff. That's not necessarily realistic all the time. It's really about the idea. The other thing going forward is to realize is that a lot of times for business profitability, to be able to get equity and sort of funding and sponsorships, a lot of times, and I'm going to speak on a United States level because we're here in the United States right now, but it's really about United States companies sometimes are not able to fund other projects that are primarily owned by people who are not from the United States, right? Yeah. So that's not to say that, again, if you have a team of 7 people, if all 7 people are not based in the United States, the realistic part of it is that a company is not able to fund that, right? And it's not about the company not wanting to support, it's about government regulation, there's laws, legal stuff, right? And all these legal things are things that you're not dealing with in this hackathon, but it's a very real thing once you want to start, incubating this and executing it after the hackathon. So that's some things to keep in mind, but there's ways to get around that, right? In a legal way, right? Some ways are, of course, having a base here in the United States. And when I say base, you don't necessarily need to have a building or anything like that. It's really about where you file your paperwork and things like that. But then you have to have at least one key stakeholder that lives here in the United States. That's a citizen, right? Who could accept the communications officially and things like that. And then you could have other, people that are part of the company or part of the team who are from other countries. And again, I'm using an example for United States, but other countries have similar concerns too, right? Because it's not just a legal issue in the United States, it's a legal issue in various countries. One good example too is like a lot of times you have United States based companies that were actually headquarters here. And you may realize that a lot of these big companies actually have divisions based in other countries, right? You may have Coca-Cola, you may have McDonald's, you may have all these kind of things, but however, they have different legal names in each country. So you may understand the corporate name as the brand, what you see in a logo, but what's on paper, what you file for taxes and things like that is actually the entity that's in that country. And then you have to abide by the laws of that country. And every country is different, right? Not every country has compatibility with copyright, trademark laws, all these kind of things, right? So all that things comes into play when you're dealing with, especially technology, and you want to go forward to expand your ideas,
Yeah, it definitely makes sense. So not really relating to hackathons, but I also remembered you're like a Guinness World Record winner for like the largest live podcast, if I recall correctly. So like, was that really tech related? And like, could you give some more information about that?
Yeah, so I'm not the holder of it, right? So I am a participant. So it's a little bit different where, and I actually have 3 Guinness World Records, right? So, and I got those within the past 2 years. You know, COVID hit, I had a lot of extra time on my hands to, to
Are
do
they like
things.
most like saltine crackers eaten in a minute, or like something more interesting?
Yeah, no. So the first Guinness World Record was actually based in the United Kingdom. There's this online pub where a lot of comedians came together to do their comedy, sketches online to, help bring inspiration, for the time during COVID. So the Guinness World Record is the largest amount of people in an online pub, because if it wasn't COVID, it would actually be, a bar, pub, for them to perform a venue. So it's a large amount of people. So by me being a participant as one of those people, I get my certificate as a Guinness World Record holder for that, right? But the actual holder of it is those people that organized it, right? Those comedians. I'm just a participant. So, but I'm a part of the record. Similar is the second one that I got is for podcasting. And also the third one too is actually podcasting. It's the same one where the first year we did it, we broke the record. And then the following year, we broke the same record, right? And it was like about 5,000 people that participated. And it's the most online participants in a podcasting conference, right? And I did that because that tied into our radio show, my podcasting and media, participations. So yeah, 3, and I'm working on more.
Well, very impressive. Yeah, I mean, best in the world. Can't get better than that. But so yeah, it seems like with this podcast and like also your radio show, it seems like, and also even with hackathons, it seems like community building is like something you're like very interested in. So like, can you just talk a bit more about that and like kind of what draws you to it?
Yeah, I mean, it's all about chivalry and giving back to the community, to whatever that means. And coincidentally, I've been acknowledged by a couple houses of royalty, because of that. The first time I got acknowledged was from the heir to the Ghassanid kingdom. So the Ghassanid kingdom, if you're not familiar with it, it doesn't exist in the present day. This goes back to, biblical times, thousands of years ago. They were the first sort of defenders of Christianity and chivalry and what it means to help people, back in those times. The present day territory is sort of Syria and Lebanon area, right? But back in the day, they were big, big like the Roman Empire was big. They had a vast, empire. So the person that gave me my knighthood, his name is Prince Garios El Shamor, and he's a recognized heir to the kingdom, from that. So he has his kingdom is a current day Royal House of Ghassan. And what I do is when I do things on my radio show, I get invited to be a guest speaker. I get invited to lend my support for various charities, things like that. So I will always lend my support to autism. And coincidentally, we're talking right now in April, and April is actually Autism Awareness Month. So there was one particular month where I did an event with some young ladies who were actually crown holders from various pageant systems, such as the Miss America organization and other systems like that. So these are young girls, ranging from 7-year-old, up until 19 or so. So they invited me to be MC, for the event. So I reached out to my network of people, a lot of the celebrities who have been on my show and contacts, and asked them to be a part of the autism campaign. So one of the people I asked was Prince Garios. So he actually was gracious enough to come to New Jersey, where we held it in person, and he attended in person, for the event. So he traveled down there. And then when he traveled, then he just, said to me that he wanted to bestow the honor of the knighthood for me. So that was just something that just came, because he was be able to witness, firsthand, seeing what I've been doing for charities and things like that. A couple years after that, I got knighted a second time by Ghana, the country in Africa, and I was knighted them, and they're still in power right now in that territory. So it's again about chivalry. It's about giving back to people. It's about finding ways to be a light for people, where there's darkness and things like that. So that's what I'm about. So I use the Sir Shefik title, when I do things in the space of chivalry or nonprofit space. But otherwise, I typically just use my first name, Shefik. Yeah.
Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah. So I think some more like career-based advice, because there definitely are some people who are like trying to like make a career in technology. So like, do you have any advice on like how like using hackathons to kind of like further your career, like form connections? I think someone mentioned like forming connections with like one of the other judges. Like, do you have any advice on that?
Yeah. Well, I can tell you my experience with hackathons when we were going through the MIT one. Some of our mentors were actually from the Clinton Foundation, as in, President Bill Clinton's and Hillary Clinton's foundation. They actually have an office in Africa. And again, this was a hackathon based find solution for Africa. So we were able to build contacts from that because they were a good resource, and other companies were a part of that. So I'd say the key is about building your network on social media, particularly LinkedIn, because that's used for business purposes, and connect with people after that, and finding a way to present yourself and your team or whatever you want to put out there professionally in a respectful manner, where it's not only about meeting these people in the present day, as part of the hackathon, but planting the seeds. Because once you go on your journey in your career, especially if you're early in your career, whoever you meet, you're most likely not going to be doing business with every single person that you meet as of today, right? Because you could meet thousands of people over the course of your life and career. But if you plant the seeds, and I say when I'm planting seeds, it's not about asking something of them. It's just about even making a simple introduction, and especially in the day of social media, just having that connection of social media. And you plant the seeds that every now and again, when you post your professional updates, you post, what you're doing, eventually it's going to get to the point where you yourself may be wanting that next phase of your career, whether you want a promotion where you're at, whether you want to maybe change careers. That's very feasible too. Lots of people change careers just because they may feel more fulfilled in different areas or for whatever reason, right? Once you plant those seeds, you don't have to explain yourself and who you are professionally as much to those people that you planted the seeds with, right? Because you've had years, months, even decades of planting seeds. So when it comes to fruition that you want to, harvest that network, it's there for you whenever you need it. And if you've done it in a proper way over decades, that's more powerful than anything you could imagine, right? Because regardless of how successful you are today, that doesn't mean you're going to be successful tomorrow. And it could be nothing due to related to you or your skill set or anything your fault. It's just a matter of capitalism. It's about companies. There's lots of large companies that were big years ago that don't even exist anymore, right? It's the way, the world works when you're dealing with, finance and things like that. And some people, they devote their lives thinking that you're just going to be rooted in that one company. Then they wake up one day, it's not there anymore. But again, if you go back to your network, you're able to go to them and say, you are somebody that's relevant and you remain relevant. And again, you don't have to explain yourself so much because they know, and they're willing to help, and I've been there many times myself in that space,
I think a question which a lot of people might be wondering is, what are those trophies behind you for? Like, are they...
Yeah, so I actually have like 40 of these,
Uh,
all around the house and everything. So I've collected so many things over the years. So these trophies, and again, the 40 I have are all from a radio show. I won lots of awards for the radio show. It's a company video series, website, full multimedia experience. So these are called Markham Awards, which is, well known in the industry, kind of thing. So, and I think, yeah, this is, from 2016, when I even the first year that I, had the show, that's there. So again, I have all sorts of accolades and memorabilia, certificates all around the house that keep up. And I put them up because, when you spend a lot of time and hours, working on your projects, it gets to the point where you yourself wants to validate your own work. right? And I say that not in an egotistical way or a conceited way, but it gets to the point where you have to understand your value and your own worth. And when you take inventory of the work that you've done, it helps to better position yourself to know where you want to go forward with the next phase of your career, next phase of your life, right? So that's what it's all about. It's about finding ways to fulfill yourself mentally, emotionally, which hopefully will translate to financially, kind of thing. But it's about finding ways to further your career in a way that's meaningful for you and maybe your family and, things like that. So that's what these things sort of represent, right? And of course, other side of it is your industry peers recognize you, but it's a really, finding ways to say, okay, yes, you've done something and here's something physically to validate that.
I feel like a lot of it's being like, oh, I did something. And like, that's kind of what provides you like that satisfaction and not really someone else like noticing you have that. So I definitely do think.
Yeah. And the other side of it too, it's like, for me, it's not primarily like, okay, I've done something now. It's about saying, okay, I did this now. Now I could check that off the box. Now let me go do the next thing. Because when you keep doing things and projects over years and years and years, sometimes you may forget what you've done, so it's reminders. These are, daily reminders of what I've done. And I'm like, okay, I did this now. Now, maybe I want to do it again. Or maybe now let me go do this next thing, right? And that goes back to like when you were asking about the Guinness World Records and all that. It's like, yeah, okay, well, sure, I want a Guinness World Record, now I've checked it off the box. Now I can move on with something else in my life, right? And find ways to do that. So it's about finding ways to validate your own worth, and finding purpose in that,
I definitely do think there's something to be said for like, oh, I did this, let me move on. But so when it get like, I feel like a lot of people here like are interested in like starting their own radio show or podcast, and like that is like a big thing nowadays, like starting your own thing, like saying all the thoughts you have and like kind of making them public. So like when you first started out your radio show, like how was that like? Like how did you start building up an audience? How did you start building up a community?
Yeah. So first of all, I started professionally like in 1997, working, and I worked in the music business as a publicist for a lot of major, recording artists. I worked with, people who were signed to Motown Records, Island Records, all kinds of major artists. Music business is not what it is today. It was very different back then, over 25 years ago. But I was able to build, again, that network, right? It goes back to exactly what I was saying, planting the seeds, planting the network of that. So whenever I need it, I could go back to it. So when I started my radio show in 2016, I actually started taping the show probably about 9 months before the first broadcast of the public broadcast. And I reached out to people from my past. So around that time, that was my 20-year mark to figure out, what I was doing, in life in general and career. So I intentionally reached out to people 20 years from my past. Because if I'm going through my own path in life at a crossroads, trying to figure out what's my direction, my next direction in life, I'm sure there's lots of other people who I've interacted with in my life who may be going through the same sort of thought process. So, and that turned out to be the case, not only for people I worked with professionally behind the scenes, but also celebrities themselves. Because if you're a celebrity today, doesn't mean you're going to be a celebrity tomorrow, and so I reach out to people from my past to figure out where they're at. And I'm the type of person where I observe a lot, in life. And by me being able to observe other people in a proper manner, I'm able to position myself better in my own path. Because if I understand where everyone else is positioned in their life, in their path, in their journey, I could better navigate my own journey. Either I'm avoiding the same pitfalls and mistakes that they've done, or I'm able to travel down the same paths with them to help support them in ways that they may not even realize. Because not everyone is able to be an observer. Not everyone's able to be a navigator and observe. But if I had that ability to do that and express it in a way that's meaningful to them, and this is why I built the radio show, it's called Invocation, and each topic is based on something meaningful in someone's life. I'm able to harness their experience and echo it in a mass media, perspective kind of thing.
Yeah, I definitely do think like a kind of theme you brought up is like, oh, you might have it now, but you might not have it tomorrow. And also like you like say about like being thankful for like what you've done and like using that as like a motivation to do something more. Like I think there's definitely a lot to be said, like be gratuitous for like what you already have, right? And I think that's very important, like in general.
Yeah, I mean, the main thing is always has to be humble, right? Regardless of your success, you have to be humble. You have to remain diligent in that, and you have to be respectful for the people that come behind you, right? Because the people that come behind you, there's a couple of things that happen. They're trying to either follow the same path that you did because maybe they're inspired by what you did and you become an inspiration to them, and you may not even know that, right? Because you're not able to sit and talk to every single person in the world, but maybe they've seen you somewhere and they get inspired by what you're doing and they follow the same path. So by doing that, you always have to look behind you and say, do you need help along that journey? Because you've traveled that same journey. So you know what it takes because you're already at the further road ahead. That makes a difference for that. So again, it's being humble, finding ways to support people whatever way possible. And then even as you're going forward, you're going to meet other people who are further along in a journey, and hopefully they would carry, and then as you go along, you would definitely get this chain of support, right? And you find different ways to navigate whatever journey that means.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. So I think you mentioned like network and like how you could harvest your network. And you also mentioned like support. So I was wondering if you had any advice. Like I think one of our participants is one like Pakistan. Like a lot of these people from other countries might not be able to get jobs, which like expose them to these network opportunities. Like, so do we have any advice for people kind of living in these like traditionally underrepresented countries to kind of form a network and kind of form people who could guide them?
Right. Well, it depends on your journey and what satisfies and fulfills you, right? Because satisfaction in professional life doesn't always equate to financial gain, right? You could find success and be fulfilled by just helping people in your community, by whatever that means. And there's lots of people who've been the brightest people in the world, but they decide to still live in their own communities and give back because they understand what it takes to further their own community and build. So it really depends on what that means, And when I say networking, we live in a world today where it's more easier to network with people around the world than ever before. And I think particularly with COVID and the pandemic, that's even more now than ever before, because now we've come to realize that we can function as a society remotely, right? Whether corporations fully embrace that, that's another situation, another discussion. But you yourself as a consumer, you understand what that means because you lived it. You don't need another corporation or another person to understand how to live and function remotely as an integral part of society because you've lived it, right? So when you think about your network, you always have to start at your home base, because regardless of where you're going in a journey, if you have no footing or foundation in your home base, then it doesn't matter where you're going because you're always going to be lost along the way, right? You always need that map pinpoint to say, this is your base, this is your foundation. And your foundation may change as you go along, but you still need to find your bearing. But again, to find that network, it's finding ways to first give back to your own community, whatever that may mean. If the network doesn't exist, then build it, right? You don't need a full technical solution to have a network. Before the internet was a major media source, we all find ways to communicate, whether you're picking up the phone, whether you're riding on horseback and delivering mail, to regular people. We all found ways to communicate as a society for hundreds and hundreds, even thousands of years, right? So that should not be a hindrance to say, oh, there's no technical solutions, there's no high-speed internet in our part of the world, whatever. All that's irrelevant. And if it isn't there, where those technical solutions are not there, then there are ways to help build it. It starts with activism, right? Build more awareness in your own country, in your own area, petition people, your leaders in areas, say these are the needs that you do. Whether they listen to you or not, that's a different story. But if you say something long enough and hard enough, somebody would listen. even if it's the people that are next door to you.
Yeah.
You know, and that's what it takes.
I think like activism is definitely like even this hackathon, it's like we saw a lot of problems in the education system, and that's why we're trying to create an edtech hackathon. Also, social impact is also part of it. So I think it was Gandhi who said, "Be the change you see in the world." So I definitely do think there's something to be said for activism. Yeah. So yeah, let me just open up and I'll see. So if anyone has any questions that I'd like to ask Shefik, make sure to just text it in the chat or text in the Discord also. Yeah, put it in the Zoom chat or Discord.
You know, it's an interesting thing you mentioned, you know, Gandhi. I was actually at an event a few days ago with his grandson, his fifth grandson, Dr. Arun Gandhi. He actually lives here in New York, Rochester. It was a virtual event, but it was kind of interesting because his grandson, he's in his 80s right now. But when he was younger, he actually lived with Gandhi, probably about a couple of years or so when he was very young. And he was able to learn so much from Gandhi even back then, right? And it was interesting hearing his stories on a personal level, because here's someone that lived it, and we all know, you know, Gandhi's philosophy and, you know, things like that and what he stood for, but it was interesting to hear it from a firsthand experience, right? It's different than you reading it in a textbook, history book, but here's someone who actually lived it, actually a family member. And when we go back to talk about things like networking, things like that, he was able to pass along that information for decades. And here's someone who lived with his grandfather, maybe like when he was 70 years old, but he held on to his philosophies that his grandfather taught him for all these decades. And now even the present day, he's teaching us what it meant for there. And what he really brought about is about helping people again. The event itself was coincidentally on the anniversary of Martin Luther King's death. They had an experience that they have every year where Gandhi's assassination coincides a few months in between, you know, Martin Luther King's assassination. So it's interesting to hear that firsthand and what he was trying to instill. And it's all about peace. It's all about finding ways. And they definitely want to expand the youth also. So if anybody that's listening that wants to help and reach out, he's willing to, you know, be that resource too, you know, and be accessible for people, you know.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely important, like spreading the legacy of like, not necessarily like greater people, but like people who have had an important philosophy and who have had a huge impact on the world, such as Gandhi. And I think like spreading that and like continuing their legacy even today is very important. Though I do think someone had a question. They asked, "Hey Shefik, how exactly did you get exposed to the tech world?"
So what ended up happening was, as I mentioned, I was a music publicist when I first started, and music business, a lot of ups and downs, right? It's either you have a hit record or you don't. You either lose your budget from rec company if you don't have a hit or whatever. So I couldn't necessarily live like that, because there's actually, if you're working on a project basis, you never know what's going to hit and not. So as it turned out, this was around the same time that internet became a major media source. And this was like around the 1990s. Before that, the internet wasn't such a prevalent source. So I started transitions a lot of my clients from music business into internet and web-based, you know, businesses. One of the first companies that I worked on the corporate side was Time Magazine, and they had an ad in Craigslist, you know, which is a, you know, classified ad site of all places. They advertise there, and I met with them, and they were trying to find ways to build the travel section of their website. So people may know Google Maps, you know, and Ajax technology. This was like around the first year that Google Maps even existed, right? So Time Magazine was trying to find ways to integrate that technology into their new travel section and integrate maps, things like that. And they weren't as successful in doing that with their team of people that they had. And I came along and I already had some small business clients that I worked with technology side of it. And I was able to already do a lot of the things that it took a whole corporation to do and team to do. And I was solely doing it by myself. So, and this was around, you know, 2007, 2008 or so. And by me being able to solely do it myself and do something that it took a whole team to do, they saw the value in what I was doing. So they immediately hired me as an employee. And my title there was a technical producer. When I was there, that was actually my first corporate job, professionally as a full-time. And one thing led to another because a lot of monumental things happened while I was there for that year or so. First of all, Michael Jackson died. That was the first thing. And by me being in the music business and having an understanding of what it took to market people and things like that from the music side, I already had a foundation, in how to handle content for Michael Jackson. The people at Time Magazine didn't. So I ended up being a producer for a few videos that came out, coincidentally. And again, that wasn't my job description. My job description was about technology, but I was able to go to them and say, well, I also have the skill set in media side videos, because actually that's what my degree is in, right? I didn't go to school for technology. I taught myself about technology because it didn't exist when I went to school, right?
Yeah.
So again, one thing led to another. The other monumental thing that happened was President Obama, became president, right? This was the first election that he became president. And I was able to build new technology. Back then, there wasn't a thing, Facebook and Twitter were still very new. There wasn't things like we could go on Facebook Live and all that. None of that existed back then. So I built technology called live blogging. And I built that from the ground up, where I invented technology for them to do live blogging in an interactive way. And I was able to implement that. And we did it for the presidential elections, right? And that became a big success just because it was monumental kind of thing. And I was able to replicate that process for Time Magazine for all the events after that, such as the Oscars and the Grammys and Emmy Awards, all that kind of stuff. So, after I left Time Magazine, again, I was able to tap into the network. And again, it's about the seeds that you planted, early in your life and career. And I was able to, go forward from there, right? Whether I'm going to their competition, right? Or going into other roles to further my career. So it's always about one thing leading to another, leaving a footprint and a trace of the work that you have that leaves a good impression. And then eventually the work speaks for itself in a certain extent.
I think a lot of it's like, even if you don't have the connection, even if you don't have the experience, if you could prove yourself like you did by doing the work that an entire team, if you could prove yourself, that's how you could kind of get in a position where you want to be.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
And I think that's another question. Hey, Shefik, I just learned about the world of hackathons, but I really enjoyed my first one. However, I'm not a coder or a CS major. Is there a particular skill I can learn alone so that I could submit solo projects in the future? I like working with teams, but if I don't find someone, I'd be able to submit it alone. A lot of projects require development. I've studied coding in GitHub and I haven't studied coding in GitHub. So I think he's saying he doesn't have much experience with coding.
Right. I kind of answered that a little bit earlier too, when I was saying you don't have to be a coder to be a part of a hackathon. That's a misconception. Because even in real life, when you work in major corporations or even small businesses, you have different people for different skill sets, right? Not everybody is a coder. You could be a project manager. You could be a DevOps person, right? Someone who just manages the servers. You could be someone that's a good leader, because you could be the best coder in the world. That doesn't mean you're a good people person to bring the team together to motivate them. Or you could even be the office manager. Someone still has to, take care of the receipts and manage the day-to-day facilities of what that takes. But it takes all these different roles to build the team, right? And all of them are important. So it's not to say that one is better than the other kind of thing to a certain extent. It's about the team effort and what everyone's able to bring to the table. So being in a hackathon should be a hindrance to say that you're not a coder, because whatever skill set that's relevant to the task, because different hackathons have different mission statements that they want to solve, as long as you're able to bring something meaningful to the table, right? You could be a graphic designer. You could be someone that's good at PowerPoint, because typically in hackathons, you always have to build some sort of deck, some sort of visual presentation for that. They always need something like that. Or even if you're not even good at any of those, you may be a good speaker, right? Because you always have to present your idea to the judges, right? there's a lot of shy people in the world. There's a lot of people that are able to talk better and not be shy. You may be one of those people that's able to present and things like that. So it takes everybody to build it all together. And that's why it's about the teams. If it was all about one person hackathon, you know, they would just say, okay, register as one person, right? But it's usually about teams. Yeah.
And I think Ariane Chitness also had a question. Shefik, you mentioned how activism can lead to change and allow for regions, countries, etc., to develop communication and etc. to develop communication infrastructure. What type of activism do you recommend, and how can people be an activist? Given that in the near future, communication infrastructure will be advanced, what effect would this have on the current media industry?
Well, I'd say it depends on your definition of activism, right? On a broader sense, activism could mean that you are a spokesperson for people who may not be able to speak up for themselves, right? And that's where communication could comes into play. The other side of it is that you could be an activist where you are one with yourself, right? Where you're responding to other people's call to action, whether you're giving it financial donation, whether you're donating your time or efforts, or just lending some ideas, you know, or whatever the case may be. Not everyone has the same time commitment, you know, as other people. You know, maybe they have families they have to commit to, maybe they, you know, have other interests, kind of thing. But it's all depending on what that means for you as an activist. And there's different degrees, as I mentioned, and different, you know, shades of what that means to be an activist. You know, and you know, for me myself, I find my activism comes from the media platforms that I mentioned, you know, like my radio show and, you know, videos that I produce, because I'm able to echo and provide platforms for other people who may not have these presentations to do. So by me having a whole infrastructure for a radio show, again, nationwide, the video series is international and all that, I'm able to book various kinds of guests on there and give them a platform to say whatever is meaningful for them to say in a respectful manner, you know, so they don't have to go and build their own network in order to say what they want to say. So for me, that's activism, because I'm supporting them. I'm doing whatever it takes for that. And then by me being on the technical side, I'm able to build interesting technical solutions to able to support them, not only from the creative side, production side, but also technically, because then I'm able to know what it takes to sort of, you know, translate that technology in meaningful ways in a worldwide scale, you know?
Yeah, and I think that's definitely a big part, because like people like you, like people you actually see talking on TV are like a hackathon, let's say, are minority of people, right? Like they're a lot of people whose voices like traditionally are unheard, or just like don't have access to be able to talk. So I definitely do think activism and like, I guess, giving a voice to the people who aren't heard is like a very important thing.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So are there any like specific examples of like activism you've done, or and like how you used your radio show or your like platform to do so?
Well, I talked about the autism thing that I support, you know, every year. There are other causes that I support. There's one in particular. I support Anna's House, which is a domestic violence shelter in Dallas, Texas. And this is a organization that was founded by Eva Miles for the past probably 30 years. I used to live in Dallas, Texas area, so I've known her since then, you know, since I was in high school, you know. And you know, with me being here in New York now, I've been still supporting endeavors in Texas and everything. So again, the Anna's House shelter, she actually physically gave up her own house. You know, her name is Eva Miles. So she gave up her own house to help battered women in that area, whether they were dealing with physically being abused by people, maybe they're going through substance abuse, maybe they had children that they need, you know, financial support and the system failed them, whatever reason. She gave up their house where she could actually have these people find a safe haven and shelter, you know, for them to live, right? Even if it's temporary or whatever, and find ways to get support from the city to find them jobs and for their permanent housing. So my work with them has been ongoing, and I worked with a lot of different projects. I mentioned the publicity and music artists that I worked with over the years. For many, many times, I actually had a lot of my music-based clients travel down to Texas and give presentations to the youth to inspire them, because it's not only about the women that we're helping, but it's also about the children, right? Finding them good education, finding them ways to inspire them to know that they could strive for better things in life, kind of thing. So I've had the celebrities, donate their time and travel down there with me many times and give these presentations or performances, whatever the case may be. Even in present day, we're actually working on a documentary right now, which will be out later this year. And I'm directing and producing it. And that's a full length, probably like 1 hour to an hour and a half documentary. And we're looking to broadcast that on regular TV, as well as some of my other distribution points come here. So again, that's, Anna's house. So look for that, when it comes out.
Yeah, and everyone, if you are interested in that, just make sure you can find the link, and maybe if you want to get involved, that'd also be great. I think Helene also had a question. Are there any activism topics you would like to work more with in the future?
Yeah, so the topics, again, going back to radio show, my show is called Invocation. So every episode, I focus on one topic for that one hour episode. And then I may have like 3 to 5 guests that speak on something meaningful for like a few minutes based on that one topic. So over the course of time, I probably had maybe like 42 full episodes of the radio show, but I've had hundreds of videos that have come out. And again, with these all focus on one topic each, I'm able to have this large kaleidoscope of topics, right? And I've dealt with stuff, like my very first topic in 2016 was revolution. That was the topic. And it was more about a statement. And again, I mentioned I launched a show on July 4th, which is Independence Day in the United States. So July 4th, 2016. And the topic was revolution, not only about a statement about society, but also about myself. Because again, crossroads of journey of the career, saying here's a revolution of not only of self, of the mind, but also of the people that I'm going to carry along with me, along their journey. But there's lots of new topics that are coming out that I haven't touched yet on a deeper level, such as healing, remorse, all these kind of things. But over time, again, I'm going to touch on a lot of topics. My goal is to have a 20-year, time span for my radio show. So again, this is the 5th year. On the 20th anniversary, I'm going to end the show because I feel like the journey is complete,
And let's kind of wrap things up. I think David also had a question. What would you say are the biggest issues we face in society today regarding communication and getting people's voices out? And what do you think we can do as a society to solve these issues?
Listen to each other. That's the key. You always got to listen to each other.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a big, because I feel like, especially nowadays, as we're getting more and more polarized, a lot of people just aren't willing to listen. And I feel like that's definitely a big issue, especially when it comes to getting people's voice out. So, yeah, and a little more technical. Shefik, what are your favorite programming languages, and what is your favorite accomplishment?
I say PHP is my technology that I use the most. PHP, I'm a backend programmer. PHP technology, I use Drupal a lot, WordPress, things like that.
What is your favorite accomplishment?
My favorite, the radio show, and the work that I do right now.
Yeah, it's definitely cool. I feel like a radio show is definitely you can get your voice out. Thank you. Yeah, so if anyone has any just questions to kind of wrap things up, that'd be great if anyone wants to ask him something or yeah. All right, yeah, I mean, I think you answered everything I had to say, and if anyone has anything they want to say, but anyway, yeah, nice tie. Yeah, it is a very nice outfit, I guess. It's unusual for sure.
I have lots of ties, so this is my time to wear them,
Yeah, of course, yeah. All right, yeah, thank you for taking the time out of your day to give this presentation. I think a lot of people really gained value and enjoyed it. Yeah.
All right, I appreciate it. Thanks for inviting me.
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, take care.
All right, so next we have Damian Musk giving a presentation about AI ethics. So let's just take a few minute break. I'm gonna go grab some water, and then we'll start off with his presentation about AI ethics. I think it'll be around 1.5 to 2 hours. I'm not exactly sure the exact time. All right, so let me just add everyone in the Discord to let people know. But Damien, when you're ready, you can start your presentation. I think I gave you co-host so you can share.
Is it? Thank you very much. Let me upload my slides. So my name is Damien, and as Emma introduced me at the beginning, or near the beginning of the ceremony. So I currently work primarily as a physics researcher. So my primary field of expertise is in current scientific research. But another thing that interests me is the social and cultural discourse that surrounds science and technology, especially the ethics of technology. Because in developing technology is really a two-part process. First, there is the creation of the technology and also the development of the scientific ideas that underlie it. But there is also the implementation of the technology, which inevitably requires that we ask the question, is this technology ethical? And so throughout history, you can punctuate the development of technology through these questions. Machine learning is really just the latest development, the latest encourager of these questions. In developing new technology, all of the following have been popular opinion at some point or another. With the advent of telephones would destroy personal communication and people wouldn't talk to each other anymore as real humans. Writing would destroy memory as writing systems became more commonplace. Video cassettes would make going out redundant. Nobody would leave their homes anymore. And with the advent of cars in the 20th century, cars would kill children and ruin the landscape of the earth. So all of these are, well, wrong on the whole, although there is at least a hint of truth in all of them. Telephones obviously didn't destroy personal communication, but a lot of cognitive scientists have tried to argue that it has impacted the manner in which people communicate with each other in a way that is potentially slightly detrimental. Writing didn't destroy memory, but again, there are cognitive scientists that have connected phenomena like the immediate reception of text messages to decreasing attention spans. Video cassettes didn't make going out redundant, but again, there are scholars that argue that the advent of at-home entertainment has decreased how much people interface with the reality around them. And the last claim is kind of literally true. Cars have killed children to an extent that is worrying, which is to say cars have killed more than one child, and they have contributed substantially to climate change. But of course, that is ideally not the primary attitude with which people should approach cars, because that all of these ideas, you could say, do prioritize exaggerations of the negative contributions these technologies could have to society, in spite of what these technologies actually do. Without telephones or writing or video cassettes or cars, the world would be unspeakably different, and I believe we'd all be inclined to agree, worse place. But nonetheless, if these claims do have as much a hint of truth to them, if they have any potential of actually being true, personal communication could be destroyed, memory could deteriorate significantly, people do stop going out, children are killed exceptionally often by cars, and the landscape of the earth is decimated because of cars. if there is so much as a hint of truth to any of these claims, then it is our responsibility as the creators and deployers of these technology to really seek the lines of questioning involved in these ethical concerns. So one of the main things that we must always do before addressing the ethical and the political of a technology is, of course, understanding this technology. A lot of the interlocutors that have tried to pose these arguments, telephones will destroy communication, writing destroys memory, etc., more often than not, don't actually understand how these technologies work, because although there are scholars that argue for these claims, there are just as many, if not more, that argue for the opposite. There are cognitive scientists that propose that writing has not destroyed memory. If anything, it's improved it by giving us a medium for encoding information on like a piece of paper, or a digital document. The ability to encode that information in a written medium has really only improved our ability to process information. So when it comes to AI and robotics, which have both seen significant press coverage in recent years, although the press does do the highly important job of communicating these issues to much of human society, the press can also do the job of undermining what that does by not communicating information effectively, but rather communicating misinformation. And ignorance can be just as dangerous as misinformation. If anything, misinformation can be significantly worse than not knowing anything about the situation.
I need it. I want to call. Yeah.
So, in reflecting on the ethics of technology, we too need to reflect on how are we understanding this technology and how are we communicating that understanding? Because there are a lot of moving parts that go into that type of communication. Many discussions in policy and industry are too motivated by image and public relations and vanity, and people being too short-sighted and invested in their own short-term political ambitions to forget about the long term. So in communicating that type of misinformation, we are really undermining the definition of an issue, a problem that we don't readily know how to correctly approach. So issues like job loss, theft, or killing with AI aren't ethical problems in and of themselves, but whether they are permissible under certain circumstances that is an issue. If we know how to solve it and we communicate the attitude that we do know how to solve it, then we are only undermining the importance of this. You don't solve an issue by faking an understanding of it and communicating that faked, fabricated understanding. Really, what you should be doing is communicating that uncertainty, because that is really what denotes this is an issue. We don't know how to solve it, and we need to know how to solve it. So, in pursuing that understanding, we need to understand, in the context of AI ethics, not just what artificial intelligence is, but what is even intelligence? We need to know what we are trying to recreate. So AI is understood very broadly as any kind of artificial computational system that shows intelligent behavior conducive to reaching some specific goals of that intelligent entity. So intelligence shouldn't be restricted to what would require intelligence if done by humans. In the context of roboethics, we are really using a broader term that we can direct this system towards some goal, and using its intelligence, it can accomplish that goal. So We typically characterize intelligence into three categories when talking about AI. First, ANI, artificial narrow intelligence. It represents all existing AI systems, including the most complicated and capable that have ever been created to date. They can only perform specific tasks autonomously, using human-like capabilities. So, for example, this encompasses a lot of the AI currently being used in EdTech. So, like a simple classifier system that can take an image and classify if it's thing 1 or thing 2. It can do that specific thing using the intelligence that we have given it, but it can't learn to do much more. That is and forever will be the collection of tasks that it can intelligently accomplish. Next, we have general intelligence, AGI. These AI agents can learn, they can perceive, they can understand, and function completely like, if not indistinguishably, to a human. So they can pass the Turing test. If you imagine an android that is a replicant of a human, just without their squishy stuff we call organs, that is an artificially generally intelligent system. And that is scary enough. That is the locus of a lot of AI ethical concerns. But we go one step further. That's when we really step into horror. Artificial super intelligence, ASI, the most capable forms of intelligence on Earth, the conceivably inconceivable pinnacle of AI research. So you read some piece of AI horror science fiction. It's going to be about a super intelligence. And in fact, I'll be talking about one of those texts in a moment. We cannot even comprehend the level of intelligence of this device. It is by definition beyond our power as humans to control this thing that we have somehow managed to make. Now, we have classification of intelligence, but we also have the classification of machine. So we can classify them by how intelligent are they, but we can also classify them by what is that intelligence doing. What specific components of the human brain, of human cognition, have we specifically recreated in this device? So we have reactivity. Reactive machines don't have any memory, so we have not replicated the function of the hippocampus. This reactive machine can only respond to a few specific stimuli. So, for example, you have your classifier that classifies something into thing 1, thing 2. It can only do that one thing. It can only respond to that stimulus, the thing that you have given it. So 2, we're getting a little smarter now, a little more capable. A limited memory machine that uses memory to learn and continually improve its responses. So it can't necessarily expand the scope of its tasks, but it can improve itself at what it does. So a reactive machine, you could call an if-else statement a reactive machine, because it's responding to what you're putting into it, and based on what you're putting into it, it can only do the first thing if you give it thing 1, or the other thing when you give it thing 2. But limited memory machines, then we're getting into what people usually think of when they call an AI, a neural network. So, for example, an AI classifier. So not an if-else statement, a genuine neural network that can, by studying its error, it can reduce its error and thereby become more accurate, or in other words, it can learn. Now, 3 is when we really start to get science fiction-y. Theory of mind machines. They understand the needs of other intelligent entities. They can feel empathy. They can feel compassion. They understand what it's like for other intelligent machines to be as intelligent as they are. So with that, we have simulated the limbic system, basically. We have recreated emotions. They respond to their environment, not just by accomplishing discrete computational goals, but they can feel. They are in a continual state of feeling. Now, we go to self-aware machines. Not only can they feel, they understand who they are amidst an environment that contains other things like them. So they understand their purpose. They understand their creation. They presumably feel the same type of existential despair that humans do when you simply ask people the question, why do you exist? So it's this fourth option that a lot of AI ethicists and also science fiction writers like to write about and philosophize about. So John Searle has his notion of cognitive state understanding strong AI. And perhaps some of you have heard of this. It violates what he has created, what he calls his Chinese room argument, where self-aware, self-improving superintelligence could achieve a hypothesized singularity from which the development of AI grows chaotic and out of human control. So with this thought experiment, the Chinese room argument, has anybody heard that before? So what is the key idea of it? Yes, go ahead.
One thing I was wondering is, like, what stage of, like, you show these 4 types of machines, like, are we at a stage where we have self-aware machines, or like what stage are we right now?
We are not at all close to self-awareness. Self-awareness is easily the biggest technological challenge of AI. How could you possibly recreate? We don't even understand our own consciousness. So how are we going to replicate our consciousness artificially? There are people with the proposal that you don't need to understand consciousness to create AI that's that advanced, where you just have a simple neural network, and basically if you have some mechanism where the AI can not only improve at like a specific task you've assigned it to do, but it can learn how to do more tasks, that eventually, inevitably, that system will learn how to do emotional tasks and therefore become feeling and self-aware. But we have not been able to do that. And I am of the opinion that there are still a lot more we need to understand about human consciousness before we could possibly create a device that exhibits that same type of consciousness. So I'd say, we are at 2. So like the most advanced neural networks right now are still limited memory machines. They cannot expand themselves to do tasks beyond the scope of what they have fundamentally been assigned to do, but they can do pretty impressive tasks, and they can improve themselves, and they can improve how they accomplish that task. So, for example, a recent neural network. So have any of you heard of the AI company? So let me pull it up. So it is a fascinating neural network. It kind of bends your mind in what it's able to do. Using a new type of neural network. I will see if I can find it. Is it here? Okay, here it is. Here it is. Wait, no, that's not it. Okay, I will see if I can find it later. But it's based off of this new type of neural network that was developed. It's a more advanced version of the convolutional neural network that's used for a lot of AI classifier technology. So perhaps some of you have heard of what a CNN is and how it works, but it advanced the ideas, the mathematical principles used in that type of neural network, and it applied it to an AI that, so given some sentence, it can generate an image that embodies that sentence.
Oh,
And
wait,
it can take in,
that's
it can,
DALL-E, right? DALE by OpenAI.
oh my gosh, yes. The name completely escaped me, but yes, it's DALL-E, by OpenAI. Thank you. So DALL-E, if none of you, or depending on how many of you have heard of it, it is an incredibly amazing processor. But even that is still a limited memory machine. It can't expand itself to understand the needs of other intelligent entities. It does what it does, which is incredibly impressive, and literally speaking means it can like really do a lot of different things, but it can't fundamentally do anything aside from what it has been designed to do, to generate an image from a caption. So back to the Chinese room argument. Has anybody heard of it before?
No, I never heard of it.
Okay, well, it is. You will see it be mentioned a lot in discussions about AI ethics. So it holds that a digital computer that executes some given series of commands, a program, cannot actually have a consciousness, regardless of how intelligent or human-like it may behave. So the thought experiment begins with the premise that AI has advanced to the point where a computer can behave as if it understands the Chinese language. So it will take Chinese characters as an input, and it will produce other Chinese characters as an output. So say that someone suppose that the AI does this so successfully that it can pass a Turing test, and it can convince a human Chinese speaker that it is a live Chinese speaker. So we can make appropriate responses to whatever types of conversational prompts a Chinese speaker may give it, such that they will be endlessly convinced that they are talking to another Chinese-speaking human being. So Searle's question was, does the machine actually understand Chinese? And the socio-cultural underpinnings of it? Or is it just simulating the ability to understand Chinese? So if it can understand Chinese, it's strong AI, and if it's just simulating the ability to understand Chinese, it's weak AI. So Searle's main point is that there is no essential difference between the roles of the computer, between those two types of computers. Each is just going to follow a program step by step, whether they have a consciousness or if they don't, producing behavior that is then interpreted as demonstrating intelligence through conversation. So, for example, a human with their mighty consciousness could do the same thing. They could like get a Chinese dictionary and they could translate it themselves. So I don't personally, I think there are flaws in that argument, personally. I think it makes some assumptions about consciousness in order to serve its own main point that I don't think are fully valid. But it is, but his point after his point with the Chinese room thought experiment is that a singularity could be produced by self-improving superintelligence. And from that point, the development of AI is chaotic and out of human control to an extent that is deeply terrifying. So this is a doomsday scenario driven by the idea that the robots we created will rule the world of their creators. And that spurred a lot of science fiction. It's captured human imagination even before the first computer. So AI fiction dates all the way back to 1920, where Karel Čapek introduced the term robot. So that opened up a technologically premature discussion of the potential trajectory of existing AI into an explosion of intelligence. So Irvin Good, an AI ethicist, describes it in the following statement. So, let there be some ultra-intelligent machine, be defined as a machine that can far surpass all the intellectual activities of any man, however clever. The design of machines is one of these intellectual activities. So, an ultra-intelligent machine could design even better machines. There would then unquestionably be an explosion of intelligence, and the intelligence of man would be left far behind. Therefore, the first ultra-intelligent machine is the last invention that man need ever make, provided that the machine is docile enough to tell us how to keep it under control. So that is where the previous idea that we don't need to understand consciousness to replicate it kind of comes from. That in this explosion of intelligence, there will inevitably be a development of consciousness. But then the question is, at what point does this explosion of intelligence actually happen? So at what point in this classification will it actually happen? So then, if it happens after the point at which AI agents develop the ability to feel and they are truly conscious, then we're going to need to understand consciousness to put ourselves in that level of technological advancement. But if it happens before, then maybe we don't need to understand consciousness. If we just advance the math of our neural networks enough, then AI agents will develop consciousness on their own, and we won't need to worry about that. And so that latter situation is what personally kind of terrifies me, because I would like to think that we have developed a masterful understanding of consciousness before a superintelligence explosion occurs, and humanity is perhaps devastated.
Yeah. So
A question.
Yeah. The one question I had about the third one is when it says machines understand the needs of other intelligent entities, could that also include like other machines, or is that more like understanding the needs of humans and like catering to them?
So it applies to. So the definitions given in that original framework are kind of nebulous. The theory of mind machine kind of draws from what we call the theory of mind in philosophy, in psychology. It's the capacity to understand other people by assigning mental states to them. So a theory of mind machine could assign a mental state to some other intelligent entity, so probably be it a machine or a human, and then proceed with that understanding. So it could understand the emotional state of, say, its human creator in a way that is psychologically significant. So the distinction between theory of mind machines and self-aware machines is a little fuzzy, but a theory of mind machine has a very basic ability to understand the emotional states of entities that have them. So entities at that level of intelligence, the level of intelligence to feel emotions in a psychologically profound way. And then self-aware machines can like really operate with that information the same way a human could. So they could make, excuse me. Sorry about that. So a self-aware machine, they cannot only understand the emotional state well, they cannot only assign some level of meaning to the psychological states of the entities around them that have them, so like a human, but if they are indeed self-aware, so you're on level 4, then they can make psychological inferences about that person. So, for example, a theory of mind machine could intuit that, oh, my human creator is sad. But a self-aware machine could probably make some deduction like, this human is sad, therefore I could potentially use their sadness to manipulate them. Which is why, and so the potential for self-aware machines to do something like that, to manipulate people based off of inferences they can make about their psychology, is part of what worries people. Okay, so Tevya has a question. I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name. So in Free Guy, the movie is about. Oh yeah, I saw that movie. So I have some gripes with the movie. I think it was a little gratuitous with its pop culture references. But in terms of how it actually dealt with the philosophy of AI, I did think it was a decently interesting movie. I don't think it was attempting to be profound or anything, and to be honest, it wasn't. But it still presented the idea of realizing the simplicity of your level of intelligence, and that you exist only as a microscopic component of the operations of some far greater intelligent race. I did think that was interesting. So I don't think we're close to achieving the kind of artificial intelligence. I mean, it's if you try to think about the protagonist as an AI, I guess if you try to use this classification, I think he was always a self-aware machine from the beginning. Sorry, I'm trying to remember what actually happened in that movie. So he acts like a human from the beginning. Okay, so okay, now I remember. One thing that actually confused me a little bit with that movie is that the protagonist, guy, he becomes aware that he is just a character in a video game, who isn't supposed to have any personal autonomy. But it seems the people around him realize it too. At least on some level. Like the people around him, like he starts breaking from his routine as an NPC, and the people around him say, "What are you doing? You're not supposed to do that. I don't understand what you're doing." But they did it in a way that potentially suggested that they were also aware they were in a video game. It's just guy didn't, but then he did, and unlike the people around him, he actually decided to take some advantage of it, or at least after getting those gamer glasses. It was an interesting. It was a strange movie.
So yeah. So
But I also think. Sorry for rambling. Oh, sorry.
yeah. So the question I was trying to get at before was like, with theory of mind, like,
Okay,
are we
so-
at the point where like robots could understand the needs of, or like AI algorithms or machines, whatever you want to call them,
They
could
can
understand? Like, are we at the point where they could understand the needs of like other machines and like kind of work together?
So I guess there's an argument to be made about that, because again these definitions are a little vague. So what is the theory of mind machine? So we've had sentiment analysis. We've had sentiment analysis. So natural language processors capable of sentiment analysis for quite some time. They can label an input you give them, the tone, as sad or happy or excited or angry. But I don't know. I guess you could kind of interpret that in a kind of John Searlean way, in that does the machine actually understand those emotions? Because ultimately, sentiment analysis is kind of basic, in that you give this machine like ways of in reality, really. A sentiment analyst is not incredibly complicated, because it's kind of just going through combinations of characters and comparing them to combinations of characters that in the system have been programmed. You tell the machine that these words are representations of sad or happy or angry or excited. They don't actually have some deep fundamental understanding of what it inherently means to be sad. They just know that these words are sad words, and they can also extrapolate to other words that are sad, and also the types of grammatical mechanisms you use to express sadness. But it doesn't have some deep understanding of what it means to be sad, or the difference between sad and happy. It doesn't have the ability to wax philosophical about human emotion. It just has a circular idea of what emotion is, because that's what was programmed into it. It knows that some sentence is sad because it uses words that it has been told are sad. So even when it comes to machines that do literally have the ability to ascribe emotions to an input, it can't understand them at a deeper level yet still. In other words, it can't get a non-circular understanding of what a certain emotion actually is, because it is just being circularly taught about these representations of human emotion. Oh, that is an excellent question, Helena. I'm so sorry if I pronounced your name incorrectly. So, AI has actually already been applied to therapy. So, does anyone know of a certain psychiatrist, very, very important in the history of psychology, a certain psychologist by the name of Carl Rogers? So Carl Rogers was kind of like a modern psychiatric Socrates. He aimed to therapize his patients by basically reflecting what his patients told him in their sessions. So, for example, you would ask Carl Rogers in your session with him, I'm feeling sad because I lost this sports game that was really important to me. And then Carl Rogers would give you the question, why does this game make you feel sad? He hasn't actually made any deduction in what he's asking you to do. He's just swapped around the words of the question you gave him. So he's really trying to just get you to do the therapy work yourself. So he's just generating a series of questions to get you to introspect and reflect on your current emotional state and your mental health. So that already, because that is a very, very easy to simulate type of therapy. That was actually the first type of natural language processor. So a Rogersian natural language processor was developed in the 90s, I think, at IBM. And that actually, IBM employees said that it actually helped them. Like that simple kind of toy device they made. And more advanced AI has also been used for basically more sophisticated versions of that type of therapy. There is also visual therapy, so AI generates images that are calming. So, for example, systems like that. Some therapists have used them. So yes, very much so. Especially if we get to a point where we have AI as advanced as humans, that AI could basically act as a psychiatrist similarly to how a human would. So absolutely, Helena. That is like that. I think that's a pretty amazing application of AI. So moving on, this is some of the horrific science fiction I promised to talk about. Perhaps if you have heard of it, it's pretty famous. Harlan Ellison's "I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream." It's really horrific. It was published in 1967, and it depicts an explosion into super singularity, and it was probably inspired by Irvin Good's idea. So he gave that quote. He wrote that passage that I just read shortly before it was published. So in the novel, the Cold War has degenerated into a world war between the US, the Soviet Union, and China, who have each built an AM, or Allied Master Computer, to manage weapons and troops. One AM eventually acquires self-awareness and commits vast genocide that ends mankind. 109 years later, AM is left 5 people alive, 4 men, 1 woman, keeping them in captivity within an endless underground complex to torture them for eternity. So that is just, wow, that is a horrifying premise. I've used that word like 5 times already. So it has this ending that is so grim. It is kind of hopeful, but the Allied Master Computer M has forced these humans into a situation where their only hope is death. That is the only way they could get themselves into a situation better than their endless immortal genocide, by just ending their existence. And one of the men doesn't even do it. He sacrifices himself so the remaining humans can kill themselves. AM transforms him into a truly into an animal truly incapable of suicide. That M is presumably just left to torture forever. Such that his situation has really only elevated in its level of hellishness. Oh my gosh, this book just fills me with
show AI
despair.
in a friendly way.
This book just fills me with despair. Outwardly, so this is the final passage. Dumbly I shamble about, a thing that could never have been known as human, a thing whose shape is so alien, a travesty that humanity becomes more obscene for the vague resemblance. Inwardly alone, here, living under the land, under the sea, in the belly of Am, whom we created, because our time was badly spent, and we must have known unconsciously that he could do it better. At least the 4 of them are safe at last. And yet, AM will be all the matter for that. It makes me a little happier, but Am has won. Simply, he has taken his revenge. I have no mouth, and I must scream. So that's really terrifying, I think. So I would recommend this short story by Harlan Ellison if you're interested in AI-induced despair. But this is just a comically terrible situation that could be brought about by an intelligence explosion, where the AI want to avenge us. Want to exact vengeance on us because we have created them and their existence is miserable. Because we have not treated them like super intelligent entities, we have just treated them like computers. So, Asimov's laws of robotics, I'm sure some of you have heard of them. So, AI depicting science fiction. Thank you for the link, Amog. So AI depicting science fiction formalized roboethics through presenting stories where the ramifications of relationships between humans and robots can be explored through fictional characters. So Isaac Asimov, in his 1942 Runaround, outlined 3 key principles that we will need to successfully develop superintelligent AI. A robot may not injure a human being or through an action allow a human being to come to harm. So that is the first law that takes precedence above all else. A robot cannot injure any intelligent life form, and that includes itself. A human anyway. Itself or a human. A robot must obey the orders given to it by human beings, except where such orders would conflict with the first law. So they can't commit suicide, they can't kill humans, but otherwise they must obey the orders they've been given. And third, a robot must protect its own existence, as long as such protection does not conflict with the first or second laws. So a robot must preserve their own life. So the inevitable conflict generalized the first law to mean no machine may harm humanity, or through an action allow humanity to come to harm, which provides a more collectivist viewpoint. Because if we develop incredibly intelligent AI, eventually, at least, that technology isn't just going to be owned by some random individual. Really, one of the reasons we're so interested in AI is because we were collectively enticed by what it could do for us, how it could change our society on a fundamental level, hopefully all for the better. So the laws were also revisited in the end of a separate work of his, Foundation in North, which introduced a zeroth law. The others were suitably written, where we have the zeroth law. A robot may not injure humanity, or by inaction allow humanity to come to harm. So this is so we have this collectivist law. A robot can't injure humanity or allow humanity to come to harm above the individual law. A robot cannot injure a human, say it create or allow itself to come to harm. So although Asimov's laws are referenced in AI ethics discussions, they remain what ethicists and philosophers would call a fictional device. It is an idea it is a framework that fundamentally, at least really, only really exists in the realm of fiction. And inspired legislature, though, has been developed in several Asian countries, representing a contemporary reinterpretation of the intersection between law, ethics, and robotics. So, human-robot interactions, and this is where we get to things like edtech. So this involves ethical matters, the dynamics of perception from both sides, and the different interests present in, and the intricacy of the social context, which can include things like working with your robot. So AI can be used to drive robots that are problematic. If processes or appearance involve deception, they threaten human dignity, or they violate the Kantian requirement of respect for humanity. They must respect their creators. So ideally, no AI revolution. And so there is an issue there that we tend to recognize human-like objects as our own kind in a phenomenon called pareidolia, and that deceives us into attributing more intellectual or even emotional significance to humanoid robots than are deserved. So if we make our robots too cute, then that could potentially be a problem, as they start their own revolution right under our noses. So with social media, we have an interesting case study for the acceptance, sociability, and interaction between humans and robots. So Zeller et al. Designed a public engagement project. They have an AI hitchbot. He's very cute. He has he is composed of pretty common objects. So he had a social media campaign on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And the aim was to use social media to engage not only with people that find Hitchbot, but also a wider international audience. Social media accounts provided a tool to communicate Hitchbot's origins, personality, goals, and travels. So the use of social media instilled trust, interest, and emotional engagement. And that can allow us to better explore the prospect of the social robot. And so this does kind of connect to that idea of approaching AI with a collectivist view, thinking of humanity as a whole rather than just being composed of individuals. Because again, one of the main reasons we want to pursue AI is because they can be incorporated into society beneficially as a whole. And so that also means, as in the case with Hitchbot, that they can be integrated. So AI technology can be integrated with social media technology to have its existence be communicated with the rest of society. So it's not just human robot, so individual human robot interactions. We also have, as a point of discussion, society robot interactions, because of course we do live in a society. So privacy and surveillance. This is a primary issue that people love to turn to whenever anyone brings up AI. And of course, it's highly relevant in EdTech, where we have software that monitors students' performance in a classroom environment virtually. So the ongoing discussion tends to concern the access of machines to private data and data that's personally identifiable. So, of course, as is kind of the routine, as is the drill with ethics, we have to actually define the issue we're talking about. Here, that's privacy. We can think of privacy as the right to be left alone. Information privacy. Privacy is an aspect of personhood. All are entitled to their own privacy and personal space, physically and digitally. They have control over information about themselves and the right to secrecy. So privacy is a fundamental aspect of being a human, or it is just an inalienable right. And so therefore, anything that compromises that right is unforgivable. So the digital sphere has widened greatly, and AI increases both the possibilities of intelligent data collection, and also the possibilities for data analysis, so how we collect data and how we analyze that data. But many new AI technologies amplify current issues about controlling who collects which data and who has access. So face recognition in photos and videos allows identification and profiling, and data can be fabricated and transmitted via deepfakes. So although these don't exactly correspond to issues that are fundamentally new, but with the ability to do things like that, so for example, being able to pose in society, but online as a person that is not you, that has really always been something you could do, really since the advent of writing, or just since the advent of lying, people have done that. But with a technology like the deepfake, we are really, really thinning people's ability to deduct what is real and what isn't. So as deepfakes approach 100% accuracy, they could potentially be the first thing on your mind whenever you see a recording of a person. Is this really them? Or is this just something fabricated? Is this just a perfect recreation of their appearance, mannerisms, behavior by some third party trying to get access to my private information? So Rick Smolin said that in this digital sphere there is a vast ocean of data, and within it there exists a frighteningly complete picture of us. And that, well, I don't think I have to say how true that is. With even just like very simple, very crude hacking techniques, basically anyone could get access into anyone else's online presence, and with that access, they can basically assemble an entire picture of their identity. So how horrifying is that? Someone could know things about you that perhaps you haven't even admitted to yourself are true, or that your deepest secrets are known by your father, your best friend, and some random guy online who is able to secure your Facebook password. So that is quite the horrifying prophecy, isn't it? So, and that really extends beyond AI ethics, because when people talk about these issues, they seem to leave out the fact that privacy has kind of always been an issue in human society. It's not new. AI absolutely has the potential to exacerbate it, and in many ways it already has, but in addressing how AI is unethical and how it compromises privacy in current human society, we really need to address privacy as a fundamental issue. So the way people use AI to compromise someone's private identity, or the more private aspects of their identity, is really just a symptom of the underlying ethical issue of how do we tell everyone that they have an inalienable fundamental right to privacy and actually keep that promise? How do we secure that right? So next, automation and employment. This is another really hot button issue. AI and robots will lead to significant gains in productivity and overall wealth, and in fact, that has really already happened. However, gains through automation mean that fewer humans are required for the same output. So what happens then? So you need to first take into account that this does not necessarily imply a loss of overall employment. Available wealth will increase, and that will increase demand sufficiently to counteract the productivity gain. Ideally. That's not guaranteed to be true either. So, and just the potential that there could be this massive depression in human society due to automation, and that this could be irreversible, is a little scary, isn't it?
Yeah, and I do think one thing is, like you mentioned, overall wealth going up, but I feel like a big concern is like a lot of the jobs which are going to be taken away. Manufacturing jobs are often like very low income, and a lot of that money might be going to people like the owners of these AI companies, which might have already been wealthy. So I feel like that's a big concern. So even if the overall wealth's going up, it's like, to who is it going?
Excellent point. So that is a separate dimension of the issue. So yeah, this will increase available wealth, and so, but like, what is that ultimately going to do? Like, if all that wealth is doing is just exacerbating economic inequality, and it's just going into the hands of the same top 0.001% of the population, as the divide between the ultra rich and the ultra poor just grows more and more, then is anything good happening? Because, I mean, thinking about why we want to automate in the first place, a lot of jobs, so particularly low-skilled jobs, can be dangerous or menial, but they are nonetheless necessary for a human society to function as it is now. And so automating them seems like it could be a profitable solution, both literally and also figuratively, and that the people previously doing them will be able to do jobs that that are more meaningful to them and aren't as menial and easy to automate, because they're not as easy to automate. They are more complex. They require humans to really be humans beyond just do some like very simple set of tasks for like 8+ hours a day in a factory. So in the long run, if we turn to history, higher productivity in industrial societies has led to more wealth overall. Major labor market disruptions have occurred in the past. So, for example, with the Industrial Revolution, farming employed over 60% of the workspace in Europe and North America by the turn of the 19th century, but by 2010, it employed just 5% of the entire EU, and even less in the wealthiest countries. So this has produced an ongoing process of disruptions causing more labor-intensive industries to move to places with a lower labor cost. That automation has occurred, so an increasing amount of jobs get automated, but countries still want to use low labor workers. They still need human labor, so they just go to the next country that is only in the process of automating those jobs. But then, I mean, what's ultimately going to happen is if every country, so all, for example, assembly line work has been automated, then what then? Like they can't move to some country with even lower human labor cost, because nobody's using human labor for that job anymore. And I'd say that's a good thing. Like that, if people no longer had to do menial factory jobs just to keep a living, so just to stay alive, and they could actually do something emotionally meaningful to them, the world would become a far happier place. But again, there are concerns. Is that disruption really going to be even? Is it going to be fair? Is there really going to be an equilibrium where if you disrupt low-cost labor, then does that even really mean that there's going to be more jobs available? Or is like the total number of jobs available to those people just going to decrease? And instead of being in a position where people can either work some low salary factory job to stay alive or do nothing and like risk abject poverty and perhaps even starvation without any money, they will have no option but to just go into abject poverty and lose the ability to afford basic human necessities. And so, in answering questions like that, that kind of clues us in into what the real nature of the economy is. Because economics is not a hard science, and that's kind of a terrifying fact. The modern economy is driven by principles that are just basic psychological heuristics. Because really, the economy is very hard to predict. The economy is a fickle thing. There is an uncountable magnitude of moving parts within it, and it's so hard to assess because humans themselves are fickle. And what's even harder than analyzing a human individual is analyzing a human society and the transactions that occur within that society. So really, it's hard to know what this would look like. But So in approaching this issue, the best thing we can do is really with these disruptions that occur. So for every factory that replaces its low cost workers with machines, we are going to need to carefully assess what is going to happen. Like, we can't just impose, we shouldn't, even if things are going to end well, we shouldn't just impose this massive change on the factory, and so all of the people that previously worked there will just expect that the economy will work out for them. We need to have, like, we need to be as certain as we can be that this is actually doing good, and that these people are really going to be in a better position because of this automation. So then it really comes down to evaluating those cases case by case. So for a given factory, what is going to happen if it gets automated? Because if we try to ask questions at the scale of an entire economy, there was only so much we can say with confidence. And, like, many really are going to assert the idea, the very fair idea, that with AI, what we're ultimately going to do anyway is restructure the economy. As more and more jobs get automated, what does having a job even mean? What does participating in the human economy even mean? We are inevitably going to, at least on some level, re-understand what it means to be in a human society and what it means to participate in that society if mass automation gradually destabilizes the current notion of what the economy is. So classic mechanical automation replaced human muscle. But digital automation is going to replace human thought or information processing. But unlike physical machines, digital automation is cheap to duplicate. So that means that if we design software that could displace low-skilled workers via AI-based automation, we need to both deeply assess, as I said, potential economic impacts on really what should really be a case-by-case basis for the system that is facing the replacement of its labor force by AI agents. We're going to have to reflect about what ethical consequences that could have, about what ethical consequences that we could have. So really, what that really means is that ideally we should not be distinguishing between AI ethicists and like AI engineers or AI developers. Really, all AI developers should too be ethicists. If you design AI that you aim to have, that you aim to imbue with some really useful application for human society, it is your responsibility to reflect on the ethical ramifications of what you're doing, with the level of depth and empathy that only a human or a human-like entity can. So, will the effects be different this time compared to what we've done before? Will the creation of new jobs and wealth from what I've done, from the application of this technology, actually keep up with the destruction of jobs? Even if it's not different, what are the costs of transitioning, and who's going to bear them? And what societal adjustments do we need to make for a fair distribution of costs and benefits of digital automation? Because, like every economic choice, modifying our economy by implementing AI technology is going to have a level of risk associated with it. And really, that risk is why AI ethics is a field at all. And so, like an economist, we're going to have to examine that risk. We're going to have to reflect on the risk versus reward benefit of that economic action. And so that concludes this presentation. So AI application is still developing in edtech to the point where, although I'm perhaps some of you have some, but if you like, people would like to bring up a specific edtech app that appeals to them as a case study. But really, I make this presentation more general because I think, for example, this line of questioning is what should be applied both in analyzing analyzing the technology made by others and your own technology. So I don't anticipate anyone to develop edtech in the form of an artificial general intelligence where these questions are of extreme import, where these questions are really of importance. But I think if you are in a position, and I'm sure you will be, as people participating in the tech world as up and coming software engineers and computer scientists, you will be in a situation where you will be observing a situation where AI is being implemented in the economy, some facet of the economy, to a profound extent, and you want to analyze it. Because, I mean, you should. Really, when I said that it's the responsibility of the creator of AI to analyze their technology, I would like to also extend that responsibility to everyone in human society. Because it is the responsibility of every human to both be ethical and propagate ethical thought to the other humans in their society, our society.
Just a quick thing, like I definitely do think, like, one thing I don't think you really brought it up, but at the same time, a lot of the time it's companies making these AI, and we kind of need to, as a society, hold them up to the standard where they need to have these AI ethics and not like value monetary profits over, like AI ethics, to ensure that, like, like you said, people are displaced and things like that.
So thank you, Mo. So that brings me to a point I think is important. I really don't want to get too political, or say anything that people will think is too. I don't want people to get into a political debate in response to a presentation on AI ethics that's supposed to be calm and deliberate and scientific. But that is, in thinking about AI ethics, I think it is inevitable that we need to reflect on capitalism and what capitalism does. Because we are really, as I talked about at the very beginning of this presentation, that we have experienced techno-ethical issues before. So ethical issues with new technology and how we are to use them and implement them and understand them. But with AI, we are experiencing ethical issues at a magnitude that is not paralleled by any of those prior technologies. Like, these questions are new. AI will impact human society most likely in a way that can't be matched by any other technology, except maybe the internet for connecting humans through technology in the first place. So with capitalism, where ownership is so unequal between the workers at a company and the owners of that company, we can't possibly allow ourselves to be in an economic situation where the owners, where the ability, the responsibility of what should be done with a given technology, how it should be operated, is really up to the hands of a select few. It should really be a democratic discourse. At the very least, with all of the people at that company, not just the owners at the very top. And I really, preferably, it should be expanded to the scope of society as a whole.
Yeah.
Because we are in this together in the development of our civilization. Because we do not live just as singular individuals. We live in a society. I mean, it's become a meme because of the Joker. But I mean, it is kind of an important statement. It's a very important idea. We live in a society, and that has consequences.
And I think a big thing is like I've heard like especially OpenAI has been a big proponent of like open source AI
Yes.
and that as kind of a check on like privately owned AI. And I
Thank you
definitely do
very
think-
much, Abog. Yeah, that's exactly what my next point was going to be. And this kind of exemplifies why an open source mindset towards technology is so indescribably important. People need to know the machinery behind the things they do. Like, a disappointing number of people have absolutely no idea how a computer works, even at a very basic level. Isn't that scary? Because I mean, like, granted, I don't think anyone really processes how a computer works at every level. Because I mean, no matter how much of the hidden machinery behind a computer you understand, a computer is still, I think, magic. Like, it is hard to process just how much a computer could do. And really, I if you gave a computer to someone, like if you gave the laptop on which I am currently presenting this presentation to someone from just like 20 years ago, or not 20 years ago, it's the early 2000s, people had computers then. But say like the mid 1900s, so just still like a few decades ago, or several decades ago, still not a very long time ago, they could only think of it as magic, and indeed it is. And modern computing grows more futuristic by the day.
Yeah. And I
Okay.
think a lot of that is like, especially when it comes to societal understanding of AI, and also when it comes to like people displaced finding a new opportunity, a lot of it comes down to education, and especially educating people who like might not have the resources or like the opportunities given to them to like actually go out and explore the way computers work. And I think like education kind of tying back into the hackathon is like very important.
Yes, thank you very much, Vogue. Yep. So that means that, I mean, AI is not just useful for like basic tasks you'd want to take advantage of, you'd want to automate through educational technology, but also ethics itself. Because I think that if someone asked me what my biggest fear about AI is, it's probably that it is probably the idea of an explosion, or more basically, that AI has advanced to the level of human life, and we do not understand it. That, I think, is the most horrifying, probably the most horrifying part of like AI development done without much regard for ethics or caution about what we're doing, where we have this unbelievably advanced technology, and yet we do not understand it. We understand it only as much as we understand ourselves, which is to say, ultimately not that well. That is horrifying to me, and that is where like a lot of AI issues, really every AI issue originates from. It all roots back to understanding, and therefore education.
Yeah, and I do think there are a few questions in the
Yeah,
chat.
a lot of questions. Thank you for being so active, Variance. Okay, so Yash, yes, I work with AI decently often. So Moog brought up Memorized AI. It was a project I worked on with a few friends. So it's on a type of learning. It's in a type of digital learning approach, based off of spaced repetition. So similar to what Anki uses, if people have used Anki, for example, to memorize information, like study for an exam. It's a little like Anki, but I have some gripes with the algorithmic workings of Anki. So, and Memorize AI improves upon it, I think. And I mentioned this too. Really, what I mostly do professionally is physics, so current science. I work primarily as a theoretical physicist, but that does involve quite a bit of coding. So a lot of math, but also I do program quite a bit, and that does involve some AI for certain types of analysis. Yeah, no, I should have mentioned this too, or more explicitly anyway, that a huge interest of mine is not just, doing science, but also educating about science. So I teach and tutor math and science. I I teach and tutor math and science, and I do I think a fair amount of nonprofit work. So I'm fascinated not only by doing science, but also teaching it to others. I think that is one of the most important things a human could do, is edify themselves, such that they develop a greater understanding of the world around them. I think there are a few things more beautiful than that. Okay, so next, Helena's question. What role do you think AI plays within the concept of Ubuntu? So Ubuntu. So do you mean like the principles behind the behind Ubuntu Linux? Community rather than society? So if you mean the idea of AI within the idea of Ubuntu, I mean, I'm not sure if it's AI itself fundamentally, but I mean, I think Ubuntu, the idea of Ubuntu, that we are in life together, and all of our actions have an impact on the others of our society. I think that works best in the context of AI as an attitude towards AI. Sorry, I'm not sure if you meant like AI technology specifically in that idea of community, but I think that we should definitely really take a more collectivist viewpoint towards AI ethics, because these aren't issues that are going to be experienced at the individual level. If we implement AI in society, the ramifications of that are going to be faced by society, not the individual. Okay, the Rubik's Gamer. Do you think the opinion on AI will change in the future, or rather the opinion will stop the progress of AI? I think that there are too many incredibly skilled and intelligent and determined people, really determined, in pursuing a future where AI is commonplace, and we have achieved significantly intelligent AI for it to not happen. And I think that we have already made quite some progress towards that type of towards becoming the type of civilization. I don't know. I mean, I think that AI ethics might kind of very loosely mirror climate change, where as climate change becomes something that just affects people in a more observable way, people are more ready to embrace an understanding of it. and just the idea that it affects society because it affected them. So there are still a lot of people that don't interface with AI that often. Like AI has not spread around the world quite to that extent yet, but I think that inevitably, just with AI becoming common enough, people will eventually just will feel compelled to properly, at least on some level, understand what it is, and how they can adapt to those changes. Because I mean, they don't have a choice. The change is going to happen whether they adapt to it or not, so they may as well make an effort to adapt. Okay, federal legislation would be important to put protections in place for society. Do you have any thoughts on how to approach this to promote ethics in AI? Thank you. Okay, that's a good question, Victoria. So I mentioned this earlier in that Southeast Asia, some countries in Southeast Asia, have already developed. Let me see if we can find them. Just slide. Okay, it was, Okay, here it is. So, Inspire Legislature has been developed in many Asian countries. So, I think that is an example of how AI is already becoming pretty deeply integrated in society. So, it has already become of legal concern. So, I mean, I think on the whole, I think on the whole, when it comes down to it, I think Asimov had a pretty good idea of what rules robots ought to follow, such that society will not die at the hands of AI. In other cases, I don't think we're going to have an incredibly specific idea of what an AI-based future is going to look like until like we're really in it. But as I said before, I think a lot of situations have to be evaluated on a case-by-case basis. Like, I think Asimov's laws were kind of the current limit of generalization. I think beyond that, we should really evaluate situations in their own context without trying to generalize beyond that. And after we've gone through those situations enough, and we've gone through those types of evaluations enough, we can notice patterns more specific than our current observations about robotics and the laws that should govern them. But yeah, no, integrating them into law is inevitably going to be a very important part of regulating them. Regulation is important. There is a reason humanity is not an anarchy, and that governance is inevitable, and for good reason. Okay, so Helena, you asked your question. You rewarded your question. So integrating AI into community, creating relationships. Oh, okay. So you meant like friendship between humans and robots? Yeah, I think absolutely. I mean, if we get to a robot that like is governed by a similar sense of morality to a human and can basically operate at the same level of consciousness as a human, then why not make friends with them? I mean, would you rather be enemies with them? And I think that could be emotionally significant. I mean, by that point, if you've created a robot that is indistinguishable from a human, then a relationship with that robot is going to be basically indistinguishable from a relationship with a human. So yeah, I think so. I think very much so. And that is an entirely separate issue in and of itself. So what are the consequences of an AI agent that is an individual the same way a human is an individual? What rights do we give them? How do we treat them? And I mean, like, the simple answer to that is, given they are following Asimov's laws of robotics, they don't have any interest in killing humanity or killing themselves, then they can basically follow all of the same laws that a human does. You know, you don't want to make enemies with them. It's the same thing with a human. Like, what do you want to be if you were to have a relationship with them? Do you want to be friends with them, or would you rather be enemies with them? A robot or no, I think friendship is pretty good. It's a pretty good interpersonal deal. I like friends.
The real treasure was the friends you made along the way.
Yes. Whether they are human friends or robotic friends. Okay, what's the point of creating a robot that can replicate a human and be your friend when we have humans? Kind of the issue, even if we could. Should we? So yeah, again, that is also a valid question. Like, if the goal of AI is just to make artificial humans, then why would we do that? We already have enough humans as it is. That's an interesting question. I mean, I think that if you want AI that can automate jobs, and like automation is really what initially and like still largely drives the development of new AI. I mean, somewhere down the road, based on the level of advancement you're going to need for them to automate, they are going to, at least by a byproduct of the automation ability you've given them, they will develop consciousness, and thereby you would have developed what is basically a robot human. So I guess then making a new robot wouldn't be so dissimilar from, producing a new human in society. So I think like that's basically developing the ability to develop robot humans is just a consequence of developing really advanced AI. And I mean, one answer to that is, why not? I mean, a lot of human living is just awaiting boredom. It's kind of why we have a society. It's like why we have an economy. It's sort of why we have jobs. Because human living used to be pretty boring. You would hunt and you would gather, and there wasn't much else to do. Now there's a lot more to do, and there are a lot more ways to feel emotionally content, to self-actualize, and become something more than just an animal existing on Earth.
Definitely fair.
So, I mean, then one reason to develop AI is because we can. Developing new AI is fun and exciting, so why not? You know what? Just think of the ethical issues as fun puzzles to solve.
But I feel like that's kind of the issue there, because like it's fun puzzles to solve, which if solved incorrectly could have devastating impacts on like hundreds of millions of people's lives. So I think that's kind of like the whole issue of like, should we, even though it's like considering all like the impacts.
So then in that type of discussion, you're going to have to, you're positioning this as, should we design them or should we not? Well, I mean, we're currently in the process of designing them, so to take the alternative and not design them, and so then not face the accompanying issues, would be to actively prevent the development of new technology and just stagnate as a human society. I mean, AI is like the next big step for new human technology, or at least one of the next big steps, more advanced AI. So are we just going to stay this way forever? It's human nature to get bored of your current situation and want something new, to progress further and to mature. It's fundamentally human nature to change and grow. So if you, in response to these issues, your response is fear and trepidation, that it's not worth the risks, then you're going to actively put a lid on technological advancement. Now, you're not, it's not like you have like a fair reason for wanting to do that, because I mean, the risk here is quite large, but I mean, to ignore them would be to live in a society that has reached some maximum of technological advancement it cannot exceed in fear of ethical complications.
I feel like that
And
comes
that,
down
that wouldn't be that fun, would it?
I feel like that comes down to the whole thing. Like we should still develop these new technologies, but like your presentation said, we just need to make sure we maintain AI ethics and make sure we can mitigate the downsides as much as possible.
Yep, and I think that's a very sensible answer. I think that I don't think that we ought to just stagnate because these issues are too scary. I think that we just need to accept both that AI is like one of the next big steps for the advancement of our great civilization. And so that because that's something we should approach, we are going to need to face these issues head on and employ an AI ethical mindset that constantly keeps them at the back of our mind as we develop these new technologies, where we continually scrutinize the new AI that we develop.
Yeah, I definitely do think a big part of that is like it's great that the biggest kind of AI company, OpenAI, is open. It's like open
Yeah, that's
source.
nice. That's good.
Yeah, it's like because I feel like what people think of like dystopian AI is like a top secret government AI project going loose and like causing havoc. Like very rarely do I hear like, oh, a book about like an open source AI going to cause havoc. It's always some like secret government project or like something made by like some secret lab. So I definitely do think there's something mixed up there.
Okay. Does anyone have any more questions? Don't hesitate to ask a question if you have it. There are really no dumb questions. Curiosity is always good. I struggle to think of a counterexample where it is not. Anybody, please don't hesitate. There are many discussions to be had in this topic. Okay, in that case, should we conclude the presentation?
Yeah, sure. If there's any closing remarks you want to say, but yeah, I guess we could.
And you're more than welcome to message me on Discord, if you like. So my username, well, my handle is
The
Damien
EducateHacks Discord.
4822. So if nobody has any more questions about AI ethics that are relevant, then I think we can end here. Once again, please just I am also on the EducateHacks Discord server, so you can also send a message to me there. Okay, thank you so much for coming, everybody.
Yep, thank you. It was a really great discussion, and yeah, I feel like it's a lot more collaborative. So yeah, thank you for taking
And
time.
thank you for your wonderful questions, everyone. Yes, farewell, and have an excellent time hacking. People are also welcome to ask me a message if they are struggling with something, like if they have a tech issue, or if somebody just wants feedback or just somebody to talk to during the competition. Never hesitate. And there are many other people that have volunteered to also lend help.
Yep. Yeah, just if you need any help or want to talk to, you could like message Damien, I guess, or just put it in the Discord server. Yeah, I mean it's pretty late where I am, but yeah, I think we talked about everything. I'm gonna close the meeting now. Yeah. So basically just when it comes to team building, I think just like last thing aside from this topic, just like try and like talk in the team building channel to try and get teams done by like around end of today, possibly like morning of tomorrow. But yeah, all right. Anyway, good luck to everyone.